Thanks, Lincoln. It's great to be back here. And I want to pick up the mood of your opening remarks and say that as we gather here for this annual coming together of what I would call the forces fighting for freedom for the people of Iran, I think we can have some sense of optimism that events are moving in the direction of our moral cause. And I say that both because of events external to Iran and also what's happening in Iran. And in this opening statement, I'll be brief. The first, I think, very significant change is the election of Donald Trump as president of the United States. I supported Hillary Clinton, so understand that I'm speaking about the policy toward Iran and the Middle East. Because for the last 8 years, we had an administration in Washington whose policy toward the East was to have a kind of benign, friendly relationship with our traditional allies, Israel and the Arab world, but to be focused on Iran. To be focused on trying to improve our relations with Iran, frankly, almost regardless of what Iran was doing. And it was targeted at the Iran nuclear agreement, which, of course, most of it, I speak for myself, felt was a bad agreement based on all that we had all put into sanctions and the rest. It didn't end the Iranian nuclear program. It gave them an enormous amount of cash. And it did not. It was, as somebody else has said, transactional. It was about a kind of a deal. It wasn't transformational. In fact, nothing about Iran's behavior has changed in the couple of years since the Iran nuclear agreement was signed. It continues to be, by judgment of the U.S. State Department, the government in the world that most supports terrorism. It continues to feed and fuel warfare and terrible human suffering throughout the region, all of which is aimed at extending its own power. I'm speaking about, obviously, Syria, from Syria to Yemen, and a lot of places in between and beyond that. So from this administration of the previous 8 years, which was, I might say, Iran-centered, and nothing has ended up being changed, we come to an administration now where President Trump has quite clearly said that two things. One is, essentially, we know who our friends are in the Middle East, and we know who our enemies are. And our enemies are Iran. We're not making that up. I mean, all you have to do is listen to the Supreme Leader and others, death to America. And the Islamic State is the second enemy. And we have friends in the Middle East, and those are the Gulf Arab countries and Israel. And I hope, as the policy review that the administration is doing now of its policy in Iran, we also acknowledge more explicitly that we have another group of friends and allies in the Middle East, and that is the people of Iran. And that is the resistance to the regime in Iran, which is represented by the organizations that come together for this weekend. Inside Iran, there are changes occurring. The fact is the economy is still terrible. One thing has not changed is that the Supreme Leader and the IRGC are still the ultimate control. As the Prime Minister said, you can say there are elections, but when the Supreme Leader decides who runs for president and approves Rouhani before he could run, you have to ask how independent he will be. And yet now, as you may have seen if you've been following recent days and weeks in Iran, Rouhani has actually begun to say some independent things, and the Supreme Leader recently warned Rouhani, and said that he should keep in mind that he could be sent into exile, the way previous leaders, presumably thinking of Bani Sadr, were. So I take this to be a sign of instability in Iran. And the other part of it is, of course, the more open expression of support for the resistance, including for the MEK, specifically around the unprecedented public discussion in the last year or so of the massacre of 30,000 political prisoners in Iran, most of whom were MEK members in 1988. It's a remarkably bold thing to be talking about publicly. Obviously, it requires, using the South African example, a truth commission. Don't expect it from this government, but the very fact that people are demanding it now says that there is the kind of unrest that can lead to the ultimate answer to this problem, which is the end of the regime in Iran.